Song of Songs. Let's start with the exercise on slide 1. Read Song of Songs, chapter 1, verses 2 to 4. Who is speaking here and what is being described? Please pause the video at this point so that you can answer the question. Read Song of Songs, chapter 1, verses 2 to 4. Who's speaking and what's being described? Well, the person speaking is a woman who's in love with a man. In verse 2, she longs for the man to kiss her. She describes his love as more delightful than wine. In verse 3, she speaks about the pleasing smell of his perfumes, his aftershave. Even his name is as wonderful to her as the smell of perfume being poured out. It's no wonder, she muses, that he's so adored by other young women. In verse 4, the identity of the man is revealed. He's the king, and she asks him to hurry up and take her to bed in his chamber. This is a woman in love with her husband. This book deals with the subjects of love and sex. And even by just reading these few verses, I think you'll agree that this is a surprising addition to the Old Testament. Introduction. Throughout the history of the church, some have wondered why Song of Songs is in the Bible. Like the book of Esther, it doesn't explicitly mention God. And as we've already seen, it focuses on the sexual love of a man and a woman. The title Song of Songs comes from the opening words of the book. This phrase, Song of Songs, has the same form in Hebrew as the phrase Holy of Holies. Just as the Holy of Holies was the most holy place in the tabernacle and the temple, so the Song of Songs is the best song, the greatest song, the song to end all songs. In fact, this song is made up of a number of love poems. 23 poems have been identified that speak explicitly about the feelings, desires, concerns, hopes and fears of two young lovers. These poems are episodes that tell a story about these young lovers. And although there's no obvious marriage ceremony in the book, because it's in the Bible where marriage is considered to be the context for sexual activity, we must assume that these lovers are married. The book mentions Solomon in the opening verse, but it's not clear whether the king described in the song is Solomon or not. It could simply be a marriage song that's been linked in some way to Solomon. Whatever the specifics, this song celebrates sexual love in marriage using rich and powerful images. The NIV has added headings throughout the book. He, that's the man, she, the woman, and friends, the woman's companions. Now, those headings aren't actually in the Hebrew text. They're an attempt by the translators to help the reader to see when there's a change of speaker. They're based on the gender of the relevant Hebrew forms of the words in each section. These headings then show us the main characters in the song. Now, in this book, the lovers describe each other as beautiful and desirable. They offer themselves to each other. Occasionally, the lovers are separated, leading to great sadness. The lovers then search for one another. They express their delight in each other. Their love is mutual and it's exclusive. It's one man and one woman in a marriage relationship. By the way, the repeated command to the daughters of Jerusalem not to arouse or awaken love until it so desires, is most likely an urging that sexual love should be kept for marriage. Let's think about an outline of Song of Songs. First of all, we have a title in chapter 1, verse 1. Then, anticipation, chapter 1, verse 2 to chapter 2, verse 7. The lovers long for each other. Then, found and lost and found. Chapter 2, verse 8 through to chapter 3, verse 5. The lovers search for each other. Then, consummation. Chapter 3, verse 6 to 5, verse 1. The lovers make love. Then, lost and found. Chapter 5, verse 2 through to chapter 8, verse 4. The lovers are separated and they search for each other again. And then finally, affirmation. Chapter 8, verses 5 to 14, where the lovers reminisce about their love. But let's consider the importance of Song of Songs for Christians. The first question we need to ask about this book is it an allegory? In other words, are we meant to find a hidden meaning here that goes beyond the physical lovemaking of this young couple? The book certainly has a long history of being interpreted in that way. Jewish scholars have interpreted it as an allegory of Yahweh's love for his people. Christian scholars have interpreted it as an allegory of Christ's love for his church. Well, although it's possible to interpret it in that way, in my view, that interpretation is quite unlikely. There seem to be no clues in the biblical text that show that it should be understood in that way. What pushes us that way is a discomfort about the subject material and a concern about why this extremely explicit book should be in the Bible. But I think if we read it at face value, this book is a celebration of human sexual love in marriage. Now, that said, because of the way that the Apostle Paul compares marriage to the relationship of Christ and his church in Ephesians 5, this book certainly illustrates that relationship. So that's one way that you can apply this book to Christians. But it's certainly not the only way. Here we have a book in the Bible that teaches us about sex. We would be foolish, I think, to let our secular world teach us about sex and not hear what the Bible has to say. Overall, Song of Songs, I believe, corrects two mistakes that are common in our 21st century society. First of all, it corrects the mistake that sex is everything. See, we live in a sex-mad world. But here, the Bible reminds us that actually sex is part of the Creator's plan for our lives. But it's not to be worshipped. God is. But Song of Songs also corrects the opposite mistake, that sex is evil. Here we're reminded as Christians that sex is good and it's pleasurable, but that it must only be kept for the marriage relationship.